Hello and welcome to the latest episode of my house buying journey. My name's Lauren and I work for an online personal finance website called Money to the Masses, and we cover a host of investing and personal finance topics over on our website moneytothemasses.com. So if you have been subscribed to our YouTube channel, you may have seen that I have been documenting the process of buying my first house. And it's almost been a year since I first moved into my property. So I thought I would do a little update to the series, just letting you know exactly what has gone on in the past year, how I've got on, and just a little update of things that I wish I knew or I've learned from the experience of buying my first home. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing 5 things that I wish I knew before buying a house. So number one, this one's fairly obvious. Anyone has the assumption that when it comes to buying your first property, that it is expensive, but no one really tells you just quite how expensive it is. So the actual buying the property itself is obviously expensive. You have to save up your deposit and then purchasing the property. Properties aren't cheap, so that itself is expensive, but there are additional costs, and moving home is so expensive, so you need to prepare for these additional costs. Now, some of these costs are the upfront costs that are associated with the moving process. Now, I had to pay the solicitor upfront costs for the searches, and in addition, you will need to budget for things like removals if you are using these to move home. Now, the upfront costs are a big thing that you should consider, and it was a large chunk that I hadn't really budgeted for, because you assume that you have your money. And for us, if you've watched our house buying journey, you will know that I used a lifetime ISA to buy our property. So a large chunk of the money that we were using to buy our first home wasn't actually accessible for me, which is why I wish I knew about these additional expenses prior to purchasing my first property. Now, not only this, but once you are in your property, there are also numerous costs that you should be aware of. So, for example, we had to pay our first mortgage payment less than 2 weeks after us moving in. Now, anyone that we had spoken to said to us, based on the dates that we moved in, they thought because of the cut-off date, we wouldn't pay our first mortgage payment until October. Now, I spoke to our lender and tried to find the exact date that they would be taking our payment, and they didn't actually notify us until we had officially moved into the property, and then told us that our first mortgage payment would be coming out in less than 2 weeks' time. Now, when you first move into a property, it is likely that the first mortgage payment is more than any of the others, and ours was £250 more than what we were going to be paying a month, and we had to pay this less than 2 weeks after we moved in. Now, we hadn't actually budgeted for this cost, so this was an incredibly expensive cost that we had when we first moved in, and we actually needed this money to try and get things that we needed in the property. So that is definitely something that I would prepare for, and if you have the opportunity to budget for this prior to moving in, then I would try to do so, just so that you can get yourself ahead, and you're paying your mortgages up front. You're always ahead of the next mortgage payment. That will kind of help you and lessen the pressure of making that first payment when you move in. So for all of these associated costs, I would recommend writing down things that you can expect to pay and putting away between £1,000 to £1,500 to maybe £2,000 just to cover these additional costs. So another thing I wish I knew before moving in is how long it takes to move home. Now, everyone tells you that moving house is a long and stressful process, and they're not wrong, but you need to be aware of exactly how long this is going to take. Now, when you look around, you search around. I did this when I was purchasing my first property. I thought that it could take 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks, and we'd be in our home. And when we first started our property purchase, this was something that could have been possible because we had a shorter chain. But then things unfolded as the chain went forward and our chain grew, and the process took a lot longer. And I wish that I was prepared for this a bit better. I already knew it was going to take a long time, and in my head I was preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. So that helped to manage, knowing that I wasn't expecting it to take a short amount of time. But this also goes further into once you are in the property. Everything takes a long time to get it to exactly how you want it to be. Now, I've realised that I am a really impatient person, and I wished that my property is exactly how I wish to be living in it right now. But even a year later down the line, it's nowhere near exactly how I would like it to be. So you have to be prepared that moving home, buying your first home, everything takes a really long time to get where you want to be. Another thing I would say is prepare for additional costs. So I briefly touched on this in my first point, saying that moving is expensive, but you need to prepare for additional unexpected costs and things that could go wrong. So while you expect moving to be expensive, you have to be prepared for those things to go wrong. So for example, when we moved in, we had the heating and electrics checked prior to the sale going through. But then once we moved in, we discovered we had a problem with our heating. This took months for the issue to be diagnosed, and then this came at a large cost to us, one that obviously I hadn't accounted for. Additionally, I wish I could have been better prepared for things that I would need when I moved in. So this is budgeting for those additional costs for things that you need. So obviously, if you have followed my house buying journey, you would know that me and my partner, we lived with our parents before we bought our first home. So we had nothing to take with us. So when we moved in, it was really easy to forget things, and there were things that we didn't realise we needed at the time. And one thing I actually remember was a potato masher that we forgot that we didn't have. So we just went out and bought knives, cutlery, all of those things that you would use, but we forgot about potato masher. There was one day that I was cooking us mashed potato, but realised I had no way of being able to mash the potato. So we had to get creative with some other utensils that we did actually have in our drawer to be able to do that. And in addition, there's other things like having a lawnmower, blinds and curtains. These things are big purchases that you probably haven't budgeted for because they're not necessities, but they are things that you do need. Now, the next point that I would say is one that quite surprised me actually, is that the process of buying a house, when you move in and you get that sale, and the first time you enter your house after buying it, it can sometimes be underwhelming. And that was certainly my experience when I first went into the property after getting the keys. And I think because buying a house is likely to be the biggest financial decision that you ever make, there's a lot of pressure and build up included in the excitement. And I was met with a sense of underwhelm when I moved in. And I just think once we moved into the home, it was different to how I had imagined it. And because it took such a long period of time, you build it up and up and up in your head. And the last time that I saw the property, there was furniture in it, there was people still living in it. So obviously it was a home. But then once we got our keys, we were standing in an empty shell. And then we had the daunting task of actually moving our stuff into the property, deciding if we were going to decorate before we put all of our wardrobes and everything up. And I had this underwhelm about the property because I'd forgotten what it looked like. Things appeared smaller than how I remembered, but then you had this feeling of overwhelm at the sheer amount of stuff that you need to do and get done so that you can try and get settled. So if you experience this, know that you're not alone. That was something that I hadn't realised that I could potentially experience. You always see on social media and in all sorts of videos that moving into a house is the most amazing feeling, so excited. So it was a really unusual feeling for me to feel that I felt almost disappointed when I first moved in, but it just quickly went away. I just think it was one of those feelings. It's just such a long process, incredibly stressful, and a lot of hype around it, that once you're in, it was almost a sense of relief that it was over. But I had completely forgotten what the property had looked like because it was a long time since I had last seen it. Now, the final point that I wish I had known is to not feel pressure by any estate agents or solicitors, and don't rush any decisions. Now, this is a key thing that I would say when buying a home, is do not give in to the pressure and persuasion from estate agents and solicitors. Now, we had a long drawn out process and constantly trying to get updates from the solicitor and estate agents to no avail. But once we neared the end of the move and we were querying something that held up the sale, we were being called and harassed to try and get the sale to go through as quick as possible. But this point in our sale was actually really important that we didn't rush it, because we had a problem with our parking space and we actually needed to ensure that that was sorted before we could complete on the sale and we could exchange contracts. So definitely do not feel pressure from the estate agents and solicitors when you are moving. Okay, so that's it for this week's video. If you have any questions about the house buying process, then do email me, lauren@moneytothemasses.com. And if you have anything that you would like to share with me about your process, or any tips or things that you wish you knew along the way, then I'd love for you to share them with me along with this video. Thanks so much for watching.